We are live. Hi, Rick.
Hey Sarah, how you doing?
Very good. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Good, good. Yeah, we have a nice sunshine here in Florida. So I don't know if everybody watch us from our state, but Sunshine State is always have sunshine. So today is no exception. So today we are going to have, uh, well, we will talk about one of the presidents that Rick is going to have a story to tell about this president. So let us get started with that one. And before we get started, I want to introduce myself. I'm Sarah M. And today I'm hosting author Rick Road. He's an authority on history and he reads a lot of history book and he's very knowledgeable. And our presenter today is a 10-time nonfiction book author and an authority on American history. He spent most of his adult life living aboard boats and has traveled far and wide in the Americas. Let's welcome Rick Rhodes. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, so today we are going to talk about John Quincy Adams. So the short description is this far-reaching service to our country with courage and integrity. So this coming weekend is President's Day when we generally acknowledge President Washington and LinkedIn. No, Lincoln. The president we are talking about today is most recognizable link between Washington and Lincoln. So historians stated he had the highest IQ of any of our US presidents, yet he remained widely unpopular. Why is that? I can't wait to learn about John Quincy Adams. Ray, tell us about what happened.
Okay, can you hear me? Are we frozen up or what?
I can
Oh,
hear
okay, okay.
you.
I thought something froze. Okay, yeah, John Quincy Adams. He did just what you said. He's probably the most recognizable link between George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln had to bury him as a freshman congressman when he was in Congress. Uh, Not exactly an enviable thing. He was very knowledgeable, and for 50 years he served our country. But he didn't want to be a politician to begin with. He wanted to become a poet or at least a lawyer. But he ended up doing that, and he was a minister to many foreign countries. He had little charm and little charisma, but he always thought of doing the right thing, and he didn't let politics. He didn't know how to play politics, so he wouldn't play politics, and he did the right thing, and it cost him over and over again. He was born to a prominent Massachusetts family, the son of John Quincy Adams, the second child, the oldest son. And when he was 10 years old, he accompanied his dad on a diplomatic mission to France to try to get France involved in the Revolutionary War. And it took no time at all for 10-year-old John Quincy Adams to learn French. And a couple of years later, I think he was 14 or something, he traveled 2,000 miles by land to Russia, again on another diplomatic trip. And before long, he knew all of Europe, all the way from Russia to the Sweden and Denmark and Finland and all those countries in between. And he could write in Latin and Greek. So he's no dummy.
Wow.
After 6 years in Europe, traveling all over and learning about, I don't know, 7 or 8 different foreign languages, he went back and entered Harvard at a pretty young age, and he finished second out of 51 in his class. And he didn't want to go into politics. He wanted to go into poetry or law, nothing else. But George Washington, the president at the time, said, "I'd like your son, James John Adams, to become my minister to the Netherlands." And John Adams said, "I want to be a poet or a lawyer or something like that." And his father said, John Adams told young Adams, John Quincy, he said, never campaign for political office, but like debt, it should not be desired, but neither should it be avoided. And basically, he convinced his son to take the job as minister to Netherlands. And then not long after that, George Washington tapped John Adams to be minister to Portugal, a little more prestigious. And then when John Adams himself became president, he appointed his son to be minister of Prussia, I believe it was. Prussia. And then in 1900, Thomas Jefferson is now the president, 1800. And John Adams was elected senator from Massachusetts. Now, he was from a different party than Jefferson. Jefferson was a Democratic Republican. John Adams was a Federalist. And Jefferson decided that the Louisiana Purchase is a good idea. And all the Federalists say, no, it's not a good idea. Just like today, one party says something, no matter how good or bad it is, the other party's going to be against it. Senator John Quincy Adams said, I think the Louisiana Purchase is a good idea. Well, he earned the wrath of his own Federalist Party, and he had no party. They disowned him after that. Pretty stupid thing. And throughout his whole political life, he felt very lonely. He had no friends because he was always trying to do the right thing and not play politics. And he asked his father about this, and I'm going to quote this exactly correctly because it's very good. You are supported by no party, my son. You have too honest a heart, too independent a mind, too brilliant talents to be trusted by any man who is under the domination of a party. You ought to know and expect this and by no means regret it. My advice to you is to take the course you are on and pursue it with moderation and caution because it is the path of justice. So his father told him, you're going to be lonely, son, but it's the right thing to do what you're doing. So in 1809, President James Madison appointed John Madison to be our first minister to Russia. He'd already been to Russia before. And then after Russia was over, he went to Ghent, Belgium, to map out the treaty of the end of the War of 1812. After that, he was appointed minister to England. And then in 1817, President Monroe became our fifth president. And no man knew foreign affairs better than John Quincy Adams, so he appointed him as Secretary of State. John Monroe's 8-year tenure with Quincy Adams being 8-year Secretary of State was known as the era of good feelings. And some historians will agree that John Quincy Adams was our greatest Secretary of State ever. Well, he did a lot of good things. Out west, he established a border between British Canada and the Oregon territory, the countries of the states of Washington and Oregon on the 49th parallel. Right here in Florida, General Andrew Jackson was wreaking all kinds of havoc. He's killing Seminoles he doesn't need to kill. He's pissing off the Spaniards and everything else. And John Quincy Adams was putting a cap on that. And he basically was able to negotiate Florida, I think it was in 1818, from the Spaniards when the Spaniards had a weak hand to play. And then came the Monroe Doctrine. In the 1820s, there was a lot of things going on in South America and Latin and Central and South America. There was a lot of revolutions from Spain, and the European powers were getting involved or trying to get involved. And John Quincy Adams via James Monroe said, let's keep these foreign powers out and let these countries develop as they want to. And that was known as the Monroe Doctrine. It's a very far-sighted thing. It's been invoked by many presidents since. Lincoln, Grant, Teddy Roosevelt, Kennedy, and even Ronald Reagan. So it's a very far-sighted thing. It's called the Monroe Doctrine, but really John Quincy Adams is the brains behind it. And it's a very good idea. And it's the beginning of the first time we had good relationships with England, started with John Quincy Adams. And then in 1824, after Monroe had done his 2 terms, it was another presidential election, and it was a very heated election. The leading candidate was Andrew Jackson, a Democrat, and the others were all Democratic Republicans. And Andrew Jackson got the most popular votes and the most electoral votes, and John Quincy Adams was second, a modestly close second in both electoral votes and popular votes. And there's a guy named Crawford was third, and I think Henry Clay from Kentucky was fourth. And if you anything about politics, if you don't get half the electoral votes, the election goes to the U.S. Senate, and that's what happened. Jackson was the leader; he had the plurality, but he didn't have the lead. And then Henry Clay of Kentucky threw his votes behind John Quincy Adams, and Adams became the U.S. president. Andrew Jackson was just steaming mad. Really, he was out to get Andrew Jackson. They didn't like each other before that, but that made matters worse. And there was already many, Quincy Adams thought Jackson was uncouth brawler, a frontier man, not a very nice man. And I think most reading I've done about Andrew Jackson will prove that out. So it was very embittered after as soon as John Quincy Adams became president. Andrew Jackson's forces were out to unseat him in 4 years, and they did do just that. And but John Quincy Adams, as president, he believed that the federal government should be a force of good. He did not believe in laissez-faire federal government. Laissez-faire means hands off everything. He believed the government should be proactive and doing a lot of different things and getting involved in, and it's exactly what he did. He got involved in infrastructure, higher education, canals, which is part of infrastructure, and many other things. He modernized the economy as best he could. Also started the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. And every day on summer mornings, John Quincy Adams would swim in the Potomac. He was an exercise guy, and every night he would take long walks. And he was a religious man. He read the Bible regularly and attended Unitarian service. In 1828, right after the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal was dedicated to be finished connecting the Chesapeake Bay watershed with the Ohio River watershed, and I've hiked that many a time, he was going to take the first shovel of dirt and hit a tree root. And he kept pounding and back, took his jacket off, and finally, it took him forever, but he finally got his first shovel of dirt. So he was a persistent man. That tells you something about his persistence, too. And he also thought we were treating Native Americans horribly, and he wanted to do something about that. And I believe in 2 weeks I'm going to talk about the Trail of Tears based on that. It's an interesting story. A lot of things happened in March. And then when he didn't get elected president the second time, Andrew Jackson was president. Totally different man than John Quincy Adams. And John Quincy Adams went back to Massachusetts, and he was elected congressman. He said, well, I guess I'll, nobody thought that was a bad idea. Once you're a president, you've reached the top of the line, you don't go back and become a congressman. Well, he was elected 9 times and served 17 years in Congress. And against the prevailing thought, he did a lot of good as a congressman. He probably did more good as a congressman. Well, he might have been the best Secretary of State ever, but as a congressman, he did a lot of good. Back in 1835, there was a British scientist named James Smithson, and he said, I'm going to give all this money to you to start something. The word he used was to increase and diffuse the knowledge among men. And all that money was squandered by the federal government. And John Quincy Adams said, no, you got to put that back as Smithson wanted and do it. And to this day, he took a lot of effort to do that. We have that. We have something called the Smithsonian. I get their magazine. It's a good magazine. And that was something that John Quincy Adams pushed back very hard to get done correctly. And it took a lot of effort, but we have it today. 19 Smithsonian institutions, 9 research centers, and much, much more, including a magazine I just showed you. So John Quincy Adams did a lot of good. He started the Smithsonian and made sure that money was going to be spent right. And then he also wanted to speak out against the expansion of slavery and possibly even the abolishment of slavery, and that made him many enemies in Congress. Andrew Jackson wanted to treat slaves, keep slavery, and also he wanted to treat Native Americans very badly, and he did. John Quincy Adams wanted to outlaw dueling, and he thought the Mexican War in the 1834 range, 1844 range was not a very good, was a horrible thing, and it was just an expansionist thing. He spoke a lot against that. I know many people I like in that era, Gallatin, Grant, who even fought and thought the Mexican War was a bad thing. So, and Grant and Quincy Adams spoke out about it. And then there's also in the 1830s, there was something called the gag rule in Congress, set up by the Southern congressmen. We couldn't even discuss issues pertaining to slavery in Congress. About 1,000 petitions came across every year for Congress to discuss the issue of slavery. And Southern congressmen said, "Can't do it. We're going to put the gag rule on." And John Quincy Adams, also known as Old Man Eloquent, said, "You just can't do that." He fought that hard for 8 years. And finally, he was able to remove the gag rule. The gag rule should never have been on, but it was on. It took Old Man Eloquent, as he was known, to fight it and win it. And then in 1839, I believe was the year, there was a ship off the Cuban coast called the Amistad. There's a movie and several books made about it. And
Mhm.
they, it was a slave ship. The cargo of slaves basically overthrew the white masters, and they sailed the boat to Massachusetts. And the president at the time, Martin Van Buren, said, "Whoa, we're going to." Spain wanted the ship and they wanted the cargo, and this cargo said, we're staying here. We're not going to become, we're not going to become slaves and probably killed for what we did." And so the president of the United States, Martin Van Buren, said, "Well, let's give it back to Spain." It was a Spanish ship. John Quincy Adams said, "No, let's hear this out in court." So this went up through the court system, and it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the slave ship eventually asked John Quincy Adams to take their case. Quincy Adams was 73 years old, hadn't tried a case in 30 years, and they wanted him to take a case defending the African slaves against the forces of Martin Van Buren, who wanted to get the ship back to Spain and the cargo, and they're probably going to pay with their lives. And the last 4.5 hours of the argument, Old Man Eloquent was really Old Man Eloquent, and he said those men have a right to fight their oppression as dictated by the Declaration of Independence. Much more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. 5 of those Supreme Court justices were Southern slaveholders, so it did not look very good. But Old Man Eloquent, as who was known, did it, and the slavers were set free, and Martin Van Buren or Spain was unhappy, but the right moral thing was done. Uh, Nearing his death, he was 80 years old. He's writing all kinds of things, trying to write laws to help Native Americans and at least stop the expansion of slavery in the West. And he ran on his 9th term in Congress, 17 years in. He had a massive heart attack in the Capitol, and he was too sick to move him away. And his last words were, "This is the last of Earth. I am content." And then he passed away. What a great man! And but yeah, I'm gonna go back to one thing. I think maybe this speech not many people know about, and I think, my opinion, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is probably one of the best speech, and his second inaugural is right there too. But John Quincy Adams had some dingers too, and this one he gave when he was Secretary of State, 45 years after our independence and 27 years before he died, 200 years ago, almost to the date, to the year anyway. And I'm going to read it to you, and I think it's really apropos today. And he didn't know he was going to be a congressman, but he gave the same speech in the floor of Congress where he was later going to serve for 17 years. And here's the speech. I'm going to read it for you. "What has America done for the benefit of mankind? She is the language of equal liberty, of equal justice, and of equal rights. She respects the independence of others and nations while asserting and maintaining her own. Wherever the standard of freedom and independence has been unfurled, there will be her heart, her benedictions, and her prayers." I'm not reading the whole thing. "She is well wisher to the freedom of all dependents and independence of all. She might become the dictatress of the world, but she will no longer be the ruler of her own heart." Old Man Eloquent. And I think often forgot about and underappreciated president today. And like I say, he was the only president between Washington and Lincoln that was of any note. And I think he's a great guy. And I think very little known about today. And I just love John Quincy Adams. Thank you, Sarah. If you got any questions for me.
Yes, I do. But before we go to the question, let me show the picture. Yep, this is his picture, John Quincy Adams. So, humble man, but smart.
Humble man. Yes, he
Yeah,
was.
yeah. Okay. So, I had some question for you. Um, tell us about John Quincy Adams' family life.
Well, he was the son of the president, John Adams. He was the oldest son. He had an older sister.
Mhm.
He had two younger brothers. All three. The girl was very helpful to the mother,
Mhm.
Abigail Adams. Was it Abigail? What was that? Wasn't Abigail? Yeah, Abigail Adams. And the three boys all became lawyers. And then John Quincy Adams married when he was an ambassador to England, married an English woman. And I think she's one of the few born, it says Melania Trump, not born in the United States. And they had four children. They had a lot of miscarriages, but one the girl died in childbirth, and they had three boys, and all three of those boys became lawyers. And one of them served in Congress too. I think that was Francis or Charles Francis.
Mm.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So Quincy Adams was unpopular in his day. So tell us a little more about that.
Oh yeah, he stood out against slavery, Native Americans, be treated with dignity, against the Mexican War, believed in a proactive federal government, believed that dueling was bad, and believed in international diplomacy, and he had little charisma. That's why he was unpopular, and
Mm.
and he didn't win an election, as it, uh, you know, because it was thrown into the Senate, and he just didn't have much charisma, but he was a great man, you know.
Mm. Yeah, that's so that's too bad. All right. If John Quincy Adams was so unpopular, how did he ever become U.S. president?
Yeah, that's when I pondered myself. Well, two things I think can answer that. Number one, the election when he was president, it was not. It was a crazy election. There were four people involved, and he was the second. And because of his the vote getting and the electoral votes as well. And he was eloquent. He was known as Old Man Eloquent. He was a great speaker.
Mm.
He knew he was saying something, and we don't want to hear what he's saying, but he was saying it so well, and he was so making such a point. He was a very eloquent speaker. So
Mm.
that's probably those two things combined is why how he became president.
Okay, good. So, what are some of his things, of the things that still exist today that we can thank John Quincy Adams for?
There are several. There are several, Sarah. Uh, Good relations with England started that off. The Monroe Doctrine, as recently as Ronald Reagan used that. The Smithsonian Institute. Thank John Quincy Adams. Well, got the back of the book here. Thank John Quincy Adams for that. Uh, Acquiring Florida through diplomacy. A great example, 50 years of public service. Washington Naval Observatory. And modernizing infrastructure in the federal government. And he believed in bipartisan politics, which was still in those days, like it is today, really antiquated. So there's a lot. His fingerprint is a lot of what we do today, including that speech I read. I think, boy,
Mhm.
4 years ago, it's just relevant today. Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions from the audience?
Well, we have a common. The first one is said that I'm going to read your book. read,
Please.
yeah, and also the second comment said that nice, nice Rick. So that's from the Facebook user. We cannot tell who that is. So I'll show that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
He's someone. Oh, there's a great book on him here. Is what I read by Lynn Hudson Parsons and John Quincy Adams. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a distiller of history. I read these long books, and I tell you, I try to put them down to 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or even an hour program. So you don't have to read the book. But if you want to get more, that's a great book.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, anybody who who get a hold of Rick's book, his his website is scrolling on the screen right now. rickroad.com. rickroads.com. You go there and find his book. Okay, anything else? Thank you, everybody, for supporting us, for watching, and tell everybody to tell your friend to come and watch the replay because the replay will stay in the Facebook uh, page and the group will be there. They can come and watch it. you can review it again. So see, I'll put up my website just in case anybody want to. This is my website, sarahim.com. I have one book. Mhm. One book is my story. So
It's a
I'll
good
show
story.
that one. Yeah. How I survived the killing fields. That's a personal story. It's related to history also because it happened almost 50 years ago. Almost.
Yeah, I remember Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. 2 million people were killed out of 7 million in Cambodia.
Yeah. It's so sad.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you so much, Rick. If
Thank you.
everybody, if you have any question, please feel to to post your information there. So hold on. Okay, so I think that's it. Let end the part and the broadcast. Thank
Okay.
you, everyone.
Thank you.